The saloon doors swung open, letting in a gust of dust and the silhouettes of three men whose reputations had arrived in Redemption Creek long before they did. The town had whispered their names for days: the Blackwood Gang, known for leaving, a trail of empty safes and fresh graves across 3 territories. The piano player missed a note, then another, before his fingers froze completely on the keys. Conversation died like a candle in the wind as boots scuffed across the wooden floor. Eliza Carter continued polishing a glass, her eyes fixed on the amber liquid she was pouring rather than the trouble that had just walked in. 6 months she'd been tending bar at the Rusty Nail, and folks around these parts had grown accustomed to her peculiar ways. How she rarely spoke above a whisper. How she never looked a patron in the eye for more than a heartbeat. How her slender fingers were always busy, always moving, always precise. Some claimed she was simple-minded. Others said she was hiding from something. Nobody knew she was hiding something else entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Whiskey, demanded Curtis Blackwood, slapping dust from his coat as he approached the bar. 3 glasses, and none of that watered-down piss you serve the locals. He was tall, with shoulders broad as an ox, and a face that seemed carved from stone by a sculptor who'd lost interest halfway through. The 2 men flanking him, one rail-thin with rattlesnake eyes, the other squat with hands like mallets, surveyed the room with the casual menace of wolves among sheep. Eliza nodded without meeting Curtis's gaze and reached for the special. Reserve she kept on the top shelf. Her movements were efficient, almost mechanical, as she poured 3 generous fingers into each glass. When she slid them across the bar, Curtis grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Ain't you got a tongue in that pretty head of yours?" he asked, his breath hot and reeking of tobacco. "Most women I meet can't seem to stop using theirs." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the saloon. Eliza's eyes remained downcast, fixed on the point where his calloused fingers circled her, wrist like a shackle. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice barely audible above the creaking floorboards. "Will there be anything else?" Curtis released her with a dismissive snort and turned to his companions. "You hear that, boys?" "Yes, sir." "Damn refreshing to find a woman who knows her place." He tossed back his whiskey in one swallow, then slammed the glass down. Another. As Eliza refilled his glass, the saloon gradually returned to life. The piano player, tentatively, resumed his tune. Conversations rekindled in hushed tones, and cards were dealt with trembling hands. Everyone was trying to pretend that death hadn't just walked through their door. "You know what I heard?" said the rail-thin man, leaning against the bar. "I heard this town's got itself a silver shipment coming through next week. Wells Fargo coach, headed for the Mint in Denver." His voice carried just enough for Eliza to hear, though she gave no indication she was listening. "That's so, Viper," Curtis replied, running a finger along the rim of his glass. "Might be worth extending our stay, then." The third man, the one with hands like mallets, grunted in agreement. "Been a while since we had a proper score. Last job barely covered our ammunition." "Patience, Ox," Curtis admonished. "Quality over quantity. One big score beats 3 small ones any day of the week." He turned his attention back to Eliza, who was wiping down the bar with slow, methodical strokes. "Say, barkeep, you wouldn't happen to know anything about this silver shipment, would you?" Eliza shook her head, still not meeting his eyes. "You sure about that?" Curtis pressed, leaning closer. "Pretty thing like you must hear all sorts of interesting talk from these loose-lipped cowboys." "I just serve drinks, sir," she replied softly. "Sheriff." Thomas Miller chose that moment to enter the saloon, the star on his chest catching the lamplight. He was in his 50s, with a silver-streaked mustache and the weathered face of a man who'd seen too much sun and violence. He nodded politely to the room, before making his way to his usual corner table, where he sat with his back to the wall and a clear view of both the bar and the entrance. "Well, well," Curtis drawled. "If it ain't the law, doesn't look like much. You doesy boys," he raised his voice deliberately. "Tell me, Sheriff, this town always roll up its sidewalks at sundown, or is it just because we're in town?" Sheriff Miller regarded the three men calmly. "Saloon closes at midnight, same as always. You gentlemen planning to stay in Redemption Creek long?" "Depends on the hospitality," Curtis replied with a wolf's smile. "So far, I'm finding the service." He glanced at Eliza, somewhat lacking in warmth. A tense silence stretched between the two men until the sheriff finally nodded. "Enjoy your drinks, gentlemen. Just remember, we're a peaceful town. Like to keep it that way." As the sheriff settled into his chair, Curtis turned back to the bar with a sneer. "Peaceful. That's what they all say right before the shooting starts." He drained his second glass. "Another round, Mouse? And this time, bring the bottle." Eliza complied, placing a fresh bottle of whiskey on the bar. As she turned to serve another customer, Curtis's hand shot out again, this time catching her by the elbow. "You don't talk much, but you're awful good at listening, ain't you?" he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I bet those pretty ears of yours catch all sorts of interesting things. Might be worth having a private conversation later, you and me." Something flickered across Eliza's face. So brief it might have been a trick of the lamplight. For just a moment, she looked directly into Curtis's eyes, and what he saw there made him blink. Then it was gone, replaced by the same downcast gaze. "As you wish, sir," she whispered. Curtis released her, momentarily unsettled though he couldn't say why. He covered his discomfort by pouring another drink and turning to his companions. "Boys, I think we might have found ourselves the perfect little town to rest our weary souls." As night deepened, the Blackwood gang claimed the large table in the center of the room, drinking heavily and growing louder with each passing hour. They told stories of their exploits: bank robberies in Santa Fe, a stagecoach heist outside, Tucson, a shootout with a posse in the Badlands, each tale bloodier than the last. The locals gradually filtered out, leaving just the most dedicated drinkers and a few curious fools who couldn't tear themselves away from the spectacle. Sheriff Miller remained in his corner, nursing a single glass of rye, his eyes never leaving the three outlaws. Eliza moved through the thinning crowd like a ghost, collecting empty glasses and wiping tables without drawing attention to herself. When midnight approached, the old man who owned the place, Edmund Bartlett, emerged from the back room and rang the brass bell above the bar. "Closing time, folks," he announced, his voice quavering slightly when his gaze fell on the Blackwood gang's table. Curtis laughed. "Hear that, boys? Grandpa says it's our bedtime." Viper snickered, but Ox was already half asleep, his massive head nodding toward his chest. "Where's a man supposed to find entertainment in this dung heap of a town after midnight?" Curtis asked no one in particular. Then his eyes landed on Eliza. "Unless the mouse here is willing to provide some alternative accommodations." Sheriff Miller stood up. "That's enough. The lady's not interested and the saloon's closing. If you're looking for lodging, the hotel down the street has vacancies." Curtis rose to his feet, swaying slightly. "You giving me orders, old man?" "Just stating facts," Miller replied evenly. His hand didn't move toward his gun, but everyone in the room was acutely aware of its presence on his hip. For a tense moment, it seemed violence was inevitable. Then Curtis laughed again, the sound like gravel in a tin can. "Come on, boys. Let's find ourselves a proper bed. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day." He tossed some coins on the table, deliberately short of their tab, and sauntered toward the door, his companions following in his wake. At the threshold, he turned back to look at Eliza. "Sweet dreams, Mouse. I'll be seeing you again real soon." After they left, Sheriff Miller approached the bar. "You all right, Miss Carter?" Eliza nodded, her movements jerky as she collected the last of the glasses. "Those men are dangerous," he continued. "Might be best if you stayed with Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house for a few days until they move on." "I'll be fine, Sheriff," she replied. "They're just passing through." Miller frowned. "I've got a bad feeling they're planning to stay a while. The silver shipment's due next week, and those vultures have an uncanny nose for that sort of thing." "Then maybe you should delay it," she suggested, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. The sheriff raised an eyebrow at her unusual assertiveness. "That's not my call to make. The mine payroll's on that coach, and folks around here can't afford to wait on their wages." He sighed, suddenly looking every one of his years. "I've sent a wire to the marshal's office in Denver, but who knows if they'll send help in time." "You could deputize some of the locals," Edmund suggested as he locked the cash box. Miller shook his head. "Blackwood's gang has killed 4 lawmen that I know of. I won't ask civilians to face those odds." He settled his hat more firmly on his head. "I'll walk you home, Miss Carter." "No need," she said quickly. "I live upstairs. Mr. Bartlett converted the storeroom for me when I started working here." The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "Lock your door then, and if you hear anything suspicious, you fire that derringer Edmund keeps under the bar. I'll come running." After they left, Eliza methodically finished cleaning, up, her mind elsewhere. When the last glass was dried and put away, she climbed the narrow stairs to her small room above the saloon. It contained little more than a bed, a washstand, and a battered trunk. She lit a lamp and sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing her carefully maintained composure to slip. Her hands trembled as she reached for the trunk, using a small key she kept on a chain around her neck to unlock it. Beneath a layer of plain dresses and personal items lay a wooden box, intricately carved with a pattern of roses. This too she unlocked, revealing a pair of Colt peacemakers with pearl handles and silver inlay. Beautiful, deadly works of art that seemed at odds with the simple woman who possessed them. Eliza lifted one of the guns, her trembling ceasing, the moment the grip settled into her palm. With practiced precision, she checked the cylinder, spun it, and pointed the weapon at an invisible target across the room. For a fleeting moment, her face transformed. Gone was the meek barmaid, replaced by something hard and dangerous and utterly confident. Then she carefully returned the gun to its case and locked both box and trunk. As she prepared for bed, her mind returned to the 3 men downstairs and the silver shipment they coveted. 6 months she'd been hiding in Redemption Creek, waiting for Curtis Blackwood to find her. 6 months of practiced invisibility, of training herself to be forgettable, to be nothing more than background noise in other people's lives. Now that he was here, she almost felt relieved. One way or another it would soon be over. She blew out the lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the window frame and the occasional shout from the hotel down the street where the Blackwood gang was no doubt making themselves at home. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. She'd faced worse odds before. As sleep finally claimed her, Eliza's last thought was of a dusty street in Tucson 2 years ago, where she'd first crossed paths with Curtis Blackwood. He hadn't known her name then, just as he didn't recognize her now, but soon enough he'd remember. She'd make certain of it. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek with streaks of crimson that painted the sky like a fresh wound. Eliza stood at her window, watching as the town slowly stirred to life. The air held the sharp bite of autumn, a reminder that winter would soon close its fist around these mountains. Sleep had been sparse, her mind replaying memories she'd fought to bury for 2 years. She dressed with deliberate care, selecting a high-collared shirt that concealed the faded scar at the base of her throat. Her fingers lingered on the trunk where her Colts rested, but she left them locked away. Not yet. Timing was everything. The saloon below creaked with Edmund's familiar shuffle as he prepared for the day. He was humming an old war ballad, unaware that a different kind of battle was brewing under his roof, Eliza descended the stairs, each step measured and silent from years of practice. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Edmund remarked as she appeared. His weathered face creased with concern. "Those men really got under your skin, didn't they?" Eliza managed a thin smile. "Just tired is all." Edmund wasn't fooled. "I've known you 6 months, girl, and you've barely spoken 20 words together. Then those outlaws walk in, and suddenly I can see something in your eyes I've never seen before." He lowered his voice, though the saloon was empty. "Revenge is a poison, Eliza. I've seen what it does to folks." Her smile vanished. "Sometimes poison is the only medicine that works." Before Edmund could respond, the front door swung open. Sheriff Miller entered, his expression grim as a funeral. "They're still here," he announced without preamble. "Paid. For 3 nights at the hotel. Been asking questions all over town about the silver shipment." Edmund cursed under his breath. Eliza turned away, busying herself with the coffee pot, though her ears remained sharp. "I wired the territorial marshal again," Miller continued. "But even if they dispatch riders today, help won't arrive before that shipment." "Can't you reroute it?" Edmund asked. The sheriff shook his head. "Too late for that. Coach is already on its way from Silver City." He removed his hat, revealing hair flattened with sweat despite the morning chill. "I'm here to ask a favor, Edmund. I need to deputize some men." "Thought you said—" "I know what I said, but we're out of options." Edmund glanced at Eliza, who kept her back turned. "I'm too old to be any use in a gunfight, Thomas. Not asking you to fight. Just need your cellar. If things go south, folks will need somewhere to hide." Their conversation continued in hushed tones, but Eliza's attention had shifted. Through the window, she spotted Viper, the rail-thin member of Blackwood's gang, watching the sheriff's horse tied outside. His posture was casual, but the calculating look in his eyes betrayed his purpose. Miller left shortly after, and Edmund retreated to his office to check the books, though Eliza suspected he was really fortifying himself with a private drink. She was alone when the saloon doors swung open again at 9:30, revealing Curtis Blackwood flanked by his men. "Morning, Mouse," Curtis called cheerfully, as if they were old friends. "Awful early for a drink, but I find whiskey tastes just as sweet at dawn as it does at dusk." Eliza nodded, reaching for a bottle without comment. The 3 men claimed the same table as the previous night, lounging with the easy confidence of predators in a henhouse. "Actually," Curtis said as she approached with their drinks, "I was hoping for something stronger than whiskey. Information. To be specific." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold coin, spinning it on the table surface. "Tell me about the silver shipment. When it's due, how many guards, the usual route?" Eliza set down their glasses, her face an unreadable mask. "I don't know anything about that, sir." Curtis caught her wrist before she could retreat, his grip tighter than necessary. "Come now. A smart woman like you must have ears." His thumb traced a circle on her pulse point. "And I'd wager there's more to you than meets the eye. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Something shifted in Eliza's expression, a flicker of the woman she'd once been. Before, she'd learned to become invisible. It vanished almost instantly, but not before Curtis caught it. He frowned, studying her face more intently. "Have we met before, Mouse?" he asked, his voice suddenly edged with suspicion. "No, sir," she whispered, eyes downcast. "Eyes down." "Funny," he mused, releasing her. "Something familiar about you." Viper leaned forward. "Boss, we got bigger concerns. Sheriff's deputizing men, so I'm talking to the blacksmith and that rancher with the limp." Curtis dismissed this with a wave. 3 farmers with tin stars don't concern me. We've handled worse." His gaze returned to Eliza. The shipment. When? Tomorrow, she answered, surprising them all. Noon stage from Silver City. A slow smile spread across Curtis's face. See? Was that so difficult? He tossed her the gold coin. How many guards? 2 riding shotgun plus the driver. Curtis exchanged glances with his men. Mighty obliging of you to share, Mouse. What changed your mind? Eliza's voice remained soft, but there was steel beneath it now. I have my reasons. I bet you do. Curtis's eyes glittered with malice. Maybe after we collect that silver, you'll share those reasons with me, over a private drink. Eliza clutched the gold coin, feeling its weight. Maybe I will. As she walked away, Viper muttered something. That made Curtis laugh. She didn't need to hear the words to know they were discussing her in ways that would have once made her skin crawl. Now she felt nothing but cold determination. The day passed slowly, the saloon filling with the usual ranch hands and miners as the sun climbed high. Eliza moved among them like a wraith, pouring drinks and collecting coins while keeping one eye on the Blackwood gang. They remained at their table, occasionally signaling for refills, but otherwise content to observe the townspeople. By mid-afternoon, news of the sheriff's deputization efforts had spread throughout Redemption Creek. Eliza counted at least 6 men wearing makeshift stars, their expressions a mixture of grim determination and poorly concealed fear. None of them were professional gunmen. Against the Blackwood gang, they were lambs awaiting slaughter. Sheriff Miller returned to the saloon as shadows lengthened across the dusty street. He nodded to Eliza before approaching Curtis's table directly. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "I'd like a word." Curtis gestured expansively at an empty chair. "By all means, Sheriff. We're just enjoying the local hospitality." Miller remained standing. "I understand you've been asking questions about the Wells Fargo coach. Is that a crime? Now, asking questions depends on what you plan to do with the answers." Curtis spread his hands innocently. "Just a businessman with an interest in transportation schedules. Nothing sinister." "Let me be plain," Miller said. "That silver shipment is protected by territorial law. Any attempt to interfere with it will be met with the full force of—" "The full force of what?" Curtis interrupted, his smile vanishing. "You and your shopkeeper deputies? Don't make threats you can't back up, old man." The sheriff's hand drifted toward his pistol. "That sounds remarkably like a confession of intent, Mr. Blackwood." The saloon went deathly quiet. Eliza froze, the bottle of whiskey in her hand suddenly heavy as lead. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Not yet, not before she was ready. For an endless moment, it seemed violence would erupt then and there. Then Curtis laughed, breaking the tension. "You misunderstand me, Sheriff. I'm simply pointing out that a man in your position shouldn't make empty promises of protection." He signaled to Ox and Viper, who rose with reluctance. "We'll be on our way. Seems the atmosphere in here has grown somewhat stifling." As they stood to leave, Curtis paused beside Eliza. "Until tomorrow, Mouse," he whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "I look forward to our private discussion." After they departed, the saloon erupted in worried chatter. Sheriff Miller approached the bar, his expression troubled. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "Edmund mentioned you told those men about the shipment." Eliza met his gaze for perhaps the first time since she'd arrived in Redemption Creek. "Yes, May. I ask why." "Because they already knew," she replied. "This way they think they have all the information they need." Miller studied her with newfound curiosity. "You're not what you seem, are you?" "None of us are, Sheriff." She glanced toward the door. "But I know men like Curtis Blackwood. They're predictable in their violence. They'll ambush the stage at Widow's Gorge where the road narrows." "How can you be so sure?" "Because it's what I would do." The words slipped out before she could stop them. The sheriff's eyes widened fractionally. "Who are you really, Miss Carter?" Before she could answer, gunshots echoed from the street. 3 rapid-fire reports followed by a scream. Miller drew his pistol and ran for the door, the saloon emptying behind him. Eliza remained at the bar, knowing already what they would find: a demonstration, a message, the Blackwood gang's calling card. When Edmund returned, his face was ashen. They shot. Tim Cooper, the blacksmith, said it was for impersonating a lawman. "Is he dead?" Eliza asked, though she already knew the answer. "As stone," Edmund whispered, "right in the middle of the street with his wife watching from their porch." He collapsed onto a bar stool. They rode out of town afterward, sheriffs organizing. "A posse," Eliza nodded, her decision made. "They'll ride back before nightfall. They want the town terrified, unable to sleep. Makes tomorrow easier for them." Edmund looked at her strangely. "You know an awful lot about how outlaws think." "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Night fell with an unnatural stillness. The streets of Redemption Creek emptied as families locked their doors and loaded their weapons. Sheriff Miller had gathered 14 men willing to ride against the Blackwood gang, but they were shopkeepers and farmers, not gunfighters. The outcome was inevitable unless she intervened. In her room above the saloon, Eliza opened her trunk and removed the wooden box containing her Colts. She cleaned and loaded them with methodical precision, her hands steady. Then she changed into clothes she hadn't worn in 2 years. Black trousers, a man's shirt, and a gun belt that settled around her hips like a second skin. She was strapping on her spurs when a knock sounded at her door. "Eliza!" Edmund's voice, and came through the wood. "Are you in there?" She opened the door to find him staring at her transformation in shock. "Sweet Jesus," he whispered. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Elizabeth Harlow," she said, her voice stronger than he'd ever heard. "Maybe you've heard of me." Edmund's face drained of color. "The Angel of Death, the woman who hunted down the Barrett brothers gang." He shook his head in disbelief. "They said you were killed in Tucson." "That's what I wanted everyone to believe." She strapped on her second gun. "Curtis Blackwood was there. He didn't pull the trigger, but he held me down while his former partner did this." She pulled back her collar, revealing the jagged scar across her throat. "They left me for dead. Their mistake. You've been hiding all this time, waiting for him to find you," Edmund asked, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I've been hunting him," she corrected, "following his trail across 3 territories. Redemption Creek is the end of the line." Edmund regarded her with new respect and fresh fear. "What are you going to do?" Elizabeth Harlow, no longer the mouse-quiet Eliza Carter, checked her weapons. "One final time. I'm going to finish what was started in Tucson, tonight." She moved past him toward the stairs, her steps sure and purposeful. The meek barmaid was gone. In her place stood a legend of the frontier, a woman whose name once struck terror in the hearts of outlaws across the West. The Angel of Death had returned, and Redemption Creek would never be the same. Moonlight spilled across Redemption Creek, transforming the dusty streets into silvered pathways between buildings that huddled like mourners at a wake. Sheriff Miller and his hastily deputized men had set up a defensive perimeter around the town square, their faces taut with the knowledge that death was riding toward them. Elizabeth moved through the shadows with fluid grace, her footfalls silent on the packed earth. She was a different creature entirely from the woman who had poured drinks and averted her gaze for 6 long months. With each step, memories surged through her. Gunsmoke and blood, wanted posters bearing her likeness, the whispers that followed her from town to town. The Angel of Death. The name had never been her choice. She found Sheriff Miller behind an overturned wagon, checking his Winchester for the 3rd time. The nearby deputies flinched at her approach, not immediately recognizing her transformed appearance. "Miss Carter?" Miller squinted, then his eyes widened. "Or should I say Miss Harlow? You know who I am." It wasn't a question. The sheriff nodded, grimly. "Suspected something wasn't right about your story from the beginning. No simple barmaid holds herself like you do, like someone constantly ready for trouble." He gestured to her twin colts. "Those are mighty fine pieces for someone who claims to just serve drinks. Then you know what I'm capable of." Elizabeth positioned herself beside him, surveying the street. "Blackwood and his men will attack from multiple directions. They prefer chaos." "This isn't your fight," Miller said, though his tone lacked conviction. Elizabeth's hand drifted to the scar, at her throat. "It's been my fight longer than you know." A flicker of understanding crossed the sheriff's weathered face. "I heard stories about what happened in Tucson. Never believed them, that a woman single-handedly brought down the Barrett gang, only to be gunned down by their allies. The stories got it half right." Elizabeth checked her ammunition. "I killed the Barretts for what they did to my brother. When Blackwood and his former partner ambushed me afterward, they thought they'd finished the job." A cold smile touched her lips. "I let the world believe I died that day, made hunting them easier." "Former partner?" Miller asked. "Man named Jake Reagan. I caught up to him in Nogales last year." She didn't elaborate, and Miller didn't ask. The grim set of her jaw told him everything he needed to know. A whistle pierced the night, 3 short bursts from the church steeple where a lookout was posted. "They're coming," Miller muttered, raising his rifle. "Remember, men, hold your positions until my signal." Elizabeth melted back into the shadows, ignoring Miller's startled protest. The sheriff's plan was sound for ordinary outlaws, but the Blackwood gang wasn't ordinary. They would expect the barricades, the armed men, the defensive positions. What they wouldn't expect was her. She circled behind the general store, making her way toward the stables where horses snorted nervously, sensing the tension in the air. From this vantage point, she could see what the sheriff and his men couldn't: 3 riders approaching from the north, while the lookout's attention was fixed on the main road from the east. Elizabeth drew both colts and waited, her breathing slowing to a measured rhythm. The pounding of her heart faded until all she could hear was the soft crunch of approaching hoofbeats. The first rider came into view. Ox, his massive frame unmistakable, even in the dim light. Behind him rode 2 men she didn't recognize, hired. Guns brought in for the occasion, they dismounted with practiced stealth, drawing their weapons as they tied their horses. "Remember what Blackwood said," Ox rumbled. "We wait for his signal, then hit them from behind." Elizabeth stepped from the shadows, her guns raised. "Evening, gentlemen!" The 3 men froze, then Ox's face contorted with rage. He reached for his pistol with surprising speed for a man his size, but Elizabeth was faster. Her first shot took him in the shoulder, spinning him around. Her second caught one of the hired guns in the chest before he could clear leather. The third man managed to fire, his bullet whining past her ear as she dropped to one knee and returned 2 shots in rapid succession. He collapsed without a sound. Ox struggled to his feet, blood seeping between the fingers clutched to his shoulder. Recognition dawned in his eyes as Elizabeth approached. "You," he gasped. "You're supposed to be dead." "I get that a lot." She kept, both colts trained on him. "Where's Curtis planning to hit first?" Before Ox could answer, gunfire erupted from the town square. The main attack had begun. He grinned through blood-stained teeth. "Too late now, ain't it?" Elizabeth pistol-whipped him with practiced efficiency. As he crumpled unconscious to the dirt, she turned toward the chaos erupting in the center of town. Flames had already engulfed one building, casting hellish light over the gun battle. The sheriff's men were returning fire from their barricades, but their shots were wild, panicked. She moved toward the conflict with deadly purpose, reloading as she went. 2 of Blackwood's men were working their way behind the defender's position, using the smoke as cover. Elizabeth took them both with 4 precisely placed shots, then changed direction, circling to where the gunfire was heaviest. Curtis would be there, directing the assault. He always did love being at the center of the action. The main street had become a killing ground. 3 of the sheriff's deputies lay motionless in the dirt. Others fired desperately from whatever cover they could find. Through the smoke, Elizabeth counted at least 7 attackers, more than the 3 who had entered the saloon. Blackwood had brought reinforcements. Sheriff Miller was pinned down behind an overturned water trough, blood streaming from a wound in his leg. When Elizabeth appeared beside him, he started violently. "Christ almighty, where did you come from?" "Where's Blackwood?" she demanded, ignoring his question. Miller gestured toward the burning building. "He was by the Mercantile last." "I saw. Got Viper with him and at least 2 others." Elizabeth nodded. "Keep your men back. This ends tonight one way or another. You can't take them all alone." But she was already moving, slipping between patches of darkness like a ghost. The din of gunfire covered her approach as she worked, her way toward the Mercantile. Through the smoke, she caught glimpses of Blackwood's men, one crouched behind a barrel, another firing from a second-story window. She counted them, marked their positions, and continued her advance. Viper spotted her first. His eyes widened in shock before his instincts took over and he raised his gun. Elizabeth's shot caught him in the forearm, shattering bone. His scream alerted the others, and suddenly she was the focus of their attention. Bullets splintered the wood beside her head as she dove for cover behind a rain barrel. Water gushed from bullet holes as lead tore through her shelter. Elizabeth waited for the inevitable pause as they reloaded, then rose and fired in one fluid motion. 2 more of Blackwood's men fell. "Who the hell is that?" someone shouted. "Who the hell is that?" someone shouted. "It's the barmaid," came the incredulous reply. A harsh laugh cut through the chaos. Curtis Blackwood, recognizing her at last. "Well, I'll be damned! The mouse has teeth!" Elizabeth reloaded with practiced speed, her fingers never fumbling despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Show yourself, Curtis. Now, why would I do a fool thing like that?" His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I'm starting to think we've met before, Mouse. Something about the way you handle those colts seems mighty familiar." "Tucson," she called back. 2 years ago, you and Jake Reagan left me for dead." A pregnant silence followed her words. When Curtis spoke again, his voice had lost its mocking edge. "Harlow, Elizabeth Harlow." Disbelief colored each syllable. "That's not possible." "I'm full of surprises." Elizabeth moved to new cover, anticipating the shot that came a second later, splintering the wood where she'd been standing. "You killed Jake?" Curtis demanded. "Slowly," she confirmed, satisfaction evident in her tone. "He begged at the end, told me everything I needed to know about finding you." Curtis's laugh was forced now, strained. "Always knew that boy was weak." More gunfire erupted, forcing Elizabeth to duck as bullets whizzed overhead. "You've caused me a heap of trouble, woman. The Barrett boys were valuable business partners before you slaughtered them. They deserved worse for what they did to my brother. Your brother was a fool who thought he could steal from us and live." Curtis's voice had moved. He was circling around, trying to flank her. "Just like you're a fool if you think you're walking out of Redemption Creek alive." Elizabeth sensed movement to her right and spun, firing twice. A man she didn't recognize clutched his chest and toppled from the Mercantile's porch. Somewhere in the smoke, Curtis cursed. "Running out of men, Curtis," she taunted. "Soon it'll be just you and me." The street had grown eerily quiet. The sheriff's men had pulled back as instructed, focusing their efforts on extinguishing the fire that threatened to spread to neighboring buildings. The gunfight had become a deadly game of cat and mouse between Elizabeth and the surviving members of the Blackwood gang. She counted her remaining ammunition, 7 rounds in one Colt, 5 in the other. Enough to finish this if she didn't. Waste shots. A flicker of movement drew her eye to the alley beside the gunsmith's shop. A shadow detached itself from deeper darkness. Viper, cradling his shattered arm but still dangerous. Elizabeth tracked him with her right-hand Colt, but held her fire. He was bait, moving too openly. Sure enough, the moment her attention focused on Viper, boards creaked behind her. Elizabeth dove forward and rolled, coming up firing just as Curtis emerged from his hiding place. Her first shot went wide, her second grazed his side. His bullet tore through the sleeve of her shirt, leaving a burning trail across her upper arm. They faced each other in the middle of the street, guns leveled, neither willing to be the first to break the standoff. For the first time, Elizabeth saw genuine fear in Curtis Blackwood's eyes as recognition dawned. "The Angel of Death," he whispered, using the name the newspapers had given her. "Should have made sure you were dead in Tucson." "Yes," Elizabeth agreed calmly. "You should have." Curtis's eyes flickered briefly to something over her shoulder, a warning that saved her life. She spun as Viper charged from the alley, a knife clutched in his good hand. Elizabeth's shot caught him in the chest, halting his rush mid-stride. As he fell, she continued her rotation, knowing Curtis would seize the distraction. Their shots rang out simultaneously. Elizabeth felt the hot sting of a bullet across her ribs, but Curtis had fared worse. Her shot had found its mark, striking him in the stomach, not immediately fatal, but a death sentence all the same in a town with no real doctor. Curtis stared down at the spreading crimson stain with almost comical surprise. "Well, don't that beat all?" he muttered, staggering backward, until his legs hit a water trough and he sat heavily. His gun slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. Elizabeth approached cautiously, her Colt unwavering, as she kicked his fallen weapon aside. Blood soaked Curtis's shirt and dripped onto the dusty ground. His breathing was already becoming labored. "Thought you'd want it to last longer," he gasped, grimacing in pain, "after what we did to you." "This isn't vengeance," Elizabeth replied. "It's justice." Curtis attempted a laugh that dissolved into a wet cough. "Same thing where I'm standing." "Not even close." She holstered one gun but kept the other trained on him. "The Barrett brothers butchered my brother for sport because he witnessed one of your robberies. Jake Reagan cut my throat and left me to bleed out in the desert. That's the company you kept, Curtis." "Business," he wheezed. "Nothing personal." "It became personal when you made it personal." Curtis's face had grown ashen, his life ebbing with each labored breath. "So what now? You gonna watch me die slow or show some mercy?" Elizabeth considered him dispassionately. "The law will decide what happens to you, if you survive long enough to stand trial. You and I both know I won't make it till morning." Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth as he spoke. "Just finish it, Angel. One last kill to add to your legend." For a long moment, the only sound was Curtis's ragged breathing and the distant shouts of men fighting the fire. Elizabeth's finger tightened on the trigger, then relaxed. "No," she said finally. "I'm done killing. You were my last hunt." Something like respect flickered in Curtis's fading eyes. "Never took you for a quitter," he managed. Elizabeth turned away. "It's not quitting to walk away from something that's finished." As she walked toward the gathering crowd of townsfolk, Sheriff Miller limped forward to meet her, his wounded leg hastily bandaged. "Is it over?" he asked, his gaze moving past her to where Curtis Blackwood sat dying against the water trough. "Almost," she answered. "You might want to send someone for the undertaker, and a doctor, though I doubt he'll be needed." Miller nodded to one of his surviving deputies, who hurried off to comply. "I don't know whether to arrest you or thank you," he told Elizabeth, keeping his voice low. "Neither," she replied. By morning, Elizabeth Harlow will have vanished again. The Angel of Death will return to her grave, and Eliza Carter— She paused, considering. "Well, I suspect she'll have moved on from Redemption Creek. Barmaids drift around, you know. The sheriff studied her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. What you did tonight. What I did tonight was finish something that began 2 years ago, she interrupted. Nothing more. And what will you do now? Elizabeth considered the question. For so long, her existence had been defined by the hunt for Curtis Blackwood and his associates. With that purpose fulfilled, what remained? I don't know, she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. I've worn so many faces, lived so many lives. Maybe it's time to find out who I really am. Miller nodded slowly. Well, whoever that turns out to be, she's welcome in Redemption Creek. Town could use someone with your particular skills. A hint of a smile touched Elizabeth's lips. I'll consider it. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of hope, the people of Redemption Creek began the process of rebuilding. Windows were boarded, the dead were laid out for burial, and the wounded were tended as best they could be. Curtis Blackwood had survived the night, though just barely. He would hang for his crimes if infection didn't claim him first. Elizabeth watched the sunrise from the roof of the saloon, her guns cleaned and returned to their ornate box. Below, the town gradually returned to life, forever changed by the night's events. Legends would grow from the ashes, tales of the quiet barmaid who turned out to be the most dangerous gunslinger in the territory. Some versions would claim she disappeared like morning mist. Others would insist she remained, watching over the town from the shadows. The truth, as always, would lie somewhere in between. For now, Elizabeth was content to let the angel of death rest. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices. For the first time in years, she looked forward to facing them, not as an instrument of vengeance, but as a woman reclaiming her own destiny. As for Redemption Creek, it had earned its name at last. Not just for her, but for all who called it home, for all who called it home, for all. 3 days after the shootout, a Wells Fargo coach rumbled into Redemption Creek, carrying not only the promised silver shipment, but something far more troubling: news. Elizabeth sat at the corner table in the saloon, sipping coffee as Edmund nervously placed the territorial newspaper before her. "Third page," he muttered, before retreating to tend his other customers. Elizabeth unfolded the thin pages, finding the small article tucked between advertisements for patent medicines and ranch equipment. Notorious gunslinger rumored alive, sources report the infamous Elizabeth Angel Harlow, believed killed in Tucson 2 years past, may have survived. Witnesses claim a woman matching her description eliminated the Blackwood gang in Redemption Creek. She folded the paper with measured precision, her expression unchanged, though her mind raced. News traveled with disturbing speed across territories that otherwise seemed vast and disconnected. More concerning was the question of who had talked. Sheriff Miller had promised discretion, and the townspeople knew her only as the quiet barmaid who'd unexpectedly saved them. A shadow fell across her table. "Speak of the devil. Mind if I join you?" Miller asked, his injured leg causing him to favor a newly acquired cane. Elizabeth gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Curtis Blackwood died an hour ago," he announced without preamble. "Never regained consciousness after they moved him to the jail." She absorbed this information with a single nod. "And the others? Ox will hang once his shoulder heals enough. The rest are being buried today. No kin claimed them." Miller studied her face for a reaction and found none. "That article concerns me." "It should." Elizabeth pushed the paper toward him. "Someone's been talking." "Not from my town," Miller insisted. "Must have been a passenger on yesterday's stage who heard the whispers." "Perhaps." She wasn't convinced. "Either way, it complicates matters." Miller leaned forward, lowering his voice. You were planning to leave, weren't you? Despite what I said about staying. I've outstayed my welcome in most places eventually. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. People get nervous around those who've killed, even when it's justified. Not this town. Miller's weathered face creased with determination. These people owe you their lives. Elizabeth almost smiled. Today they're grateful. Tomorrow they'll remember to be afraid. Before Miller could argue further, the saloon doors swung open, admitting a tall figure backlit by the midday sun. Both Elizabeth and the sheriff tensed instinctively, hands moving toward weapons, before recognizing the silhouette of Edmund returning. From his errand to the general store. Getting jumpy in your old age, Thomas, Edmund joked, approaching their table with a bundle under his arm. His smile faded as he noted their expressions. What's happened? Miller gestured toward the newspaper. News travels. Damn. Edmund sank into an empty chair. That changes things. It does, Elizabeth agreed, finally taking a sip of her cooling coffee. I'll ride out at dusk. The hell you will, Edmund surprised her with his vehemence. You think you're the first person in this town with a past? Half the settlers here came west, running from something. Elizabeth arched an eyebrow. Even you, Edmund. Especially me. A shadow passed across his face. Why do you think a man with my education is running a saloon in a speck of dust like Redemption Creek? Miller nodded. Man's got a point. Your situation isn't as unique as you might think. Elizabeth shook her head. There's a difference between fleeing debt collectors or a failed marriage and having every bounty hunter between here and St. Louis gunning for the reward on your head. What reward? Miller asked. According to the law, Elizabeth Harlow died 2 years ago. Any bounties died with her. Technicalities rarely matter to men desperate for money, she countered. The article mentions me by name. Edmund unwrapped his bundle, revealing a stack of handwritten notices. That's why I had these made up. He slid one across the table to Elizabeth. Meet the newest Deputy Marshal of Redemption Creek, Elizabeth Hart, transferred from the Wyoming Territory. Her eyes widened as she studied the document. A remarkably convincing Deputy Marshal's commission bearing an excellent forgery of a territorial judge's signature. This is a federal offense, she murmured, impressed despite herself. Edmund shrugged. Add it to my list. The point is, no one questions a badge. You wear this, suddenly those rumors seem like mistaken identity. Miller was nodding with growing enthusiasm. It's brilliant. I've been saying for months the town's grown too large for one sheriff. And this just happens to coincide with the destruction of the Blackwood gang? Elizabeth's skepticism was evident. That's the beauty of it, Edmund countered. The timing makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't the territory send reinforcement after learning notorious outlaws were in the area? Elizabeth stared at the false commission, weighing decade-old instincts against a newfound weariness of constant flight. It won't work forever. Nothing does, Miller acknowledged. But it might buy enough time for the rumors to die down, for people to know you as Deputy Hart instead of your other name. And if someone recognizes me, Edmund's expression hardened, then they'll have to get through the entire town to reach you. Such loyalty was foreign to Elizabeth after years of solitary existence. The offer tempted her more than she cared to admit. Not just safety, but purpose beyond revenge, community beyond her own survival. I'll consider it, she conceded finally, but I'm not wearing a star. Too easy a target. Miller chuckled. Fair enough. The paperwork's what matters anyway. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young boy, no more than 12, who skidded to a stop at their table with the reckless enthusiasm of youth. Sheriff Miller. Mr. Bartlett, he gasped, struggling to catch his breath. Stage. Driver says there's riders coming. Says they look like lawmen, but not any he recognizes. Miller and Elizabeth exchanged sharp glances. How many? The sheriff demanded. 6, sir, all armed. Driver spotted them at Carson's Ridge. That gives us an hour, maybe less. Miller calculated, rising with difficulty. Could be legitimate marshals following up on the Blackwood situation. Or bounty hunters using badges as cover, Elizabeth countered, her mind already cataloguing escape routes. Either way, I should make myself scarce. Edmund pushed the false commission toward her. Or you could be exactly who these papers say you are. For a long moment, Elizabeth wavered between flight and confrontation. She'd survived this long by disappearing at the first sign of danger. Yet something about Redemption Creek pulled at her, a promise of what might be if she stood her ground. Very well, she decided abruptly, but we do this properly. She turned to Miller. I need access to the telegraph office. Miller raised an eyebrow. What are you planning? Insurance? Elizabeth replied, already moving toward the door. And calling in a very old debt. The next hour passed in a flurry of preparation. Elizabeth sent a telegram, coded in a cipher known only to a handful of people west of the Mississippi. Miller gathered his remaining deputies, briefing them on their unexpected reinforcement from the Territorial Marshal's office. Edmund closed. The saloon to casual visitors, serving only trusted locals who were sworn to secrecy about their town's newest resident. Elizabeth changed into more formal attire, a dark blue riding skirt paired with a crisp white blouse, her gun belt hidden beneath a tailored jacket. She looked nothing like the meek barmaid who had poured whiskey for Curtis Blackwood, nor the black-clad avenger who had ended his reign of terror. Instead, she projected the confident authority of a seasoned lawwoman. When the riders entered town, Elizabeth observed them from the sheriff's office window. Their matching dusters and the purposeful way they scanned buildings marked them as experienced manhunters rather than ordinary lawmen. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man with a silver-streaked beard, directed his companions with curt hand signals as they dismounted in front of the hotel. Bounty hunters, she confirmed to Miller, but cautious ones. They'll ask questions before they start shooting. Miller nodded grimly. Gives us time to establish your cover. If they believe it. Elizabeth checked her timepiece. We should receive a response to my telegram within the hour, assuming my contact still operates in Denver. And if not, she offered a tight smile, then we discover how committed your townspeople are to their new deputy. The anticipated confrontation began sooner than expected. Elizabeth had barely settled behind the sheriff's desk, document box open, before her as if reviewing case files, when boots thumped on the wooden sidewalk outside. The door swung open without so much as a courtesy knock. Sheriff Miller? The bearded leader filled the doorframe, hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. His eyes registered Elizabeth's presence with momentary confusion. That's me, Miller replied from his position by the gun rack, deliberately cleaning a shotgun. Something I can help you with, stranger. I can help you with, stranger. I can help. The man produced a folded paper from his coat. Name's Brock Elkins. Me and my associates are licensed bounty hunters operating out of Santa Fe. Got information that a fugitive might be in your jurisdiction. That's so. Miller set down his shotgun and accepted the paper, unfolding it with deliberate slowness. What kind of fugitive? Dangerous one. Elkins' gaze drifted to Elizabeth again, assessment written in every line of his face. Female outlaw goes by Elizabeth Harlow. Some call her the Angel. Dead, Elizabeth interrupted, rising from the desk with fluid grace. Shot in Tucson 2 years ago, according to official reports. She extended her hand. Deputy Marshal Elizabeth Hart, Wyoming Territory. Recently reassigned. Elkins hesitated before accepting the handshake, his calloused palm rough against hers. Funny coincidence, you having the same first name. Common name, she replied coolly. I've got 3 cousins who share it. Deputy Hart arrived 4 days ago, Miller added smoothly. Good timing, too, considering the trouble we've had. Elkins frowned. What trouble? Blackwood gang, Miller answered. Tried to take the town night before last. Would have succeeded if not for the deputy here. Interest sharpened in Elkins's eyes. Curtis Blackwood, the same one rumored to have connections to the Barrett brothers gang? One and the same, Miller confirmed. He's cooling in our jail at present, or was, until his wounds finished him. Elkins exchanged glances with one of his men who had followed him inside. That's mighty interesting timing, Sheriff. We heard rumors Elizabeth Harlow was hunting Blackwood. Something about revenge for what happened in Tucson. Sounds like a dime novel plot to me, Elizabeth remarked, casually moving to stand beside a wanted poster board, positioning herself with clear sight lines to both door and window. Dead women don't hunt anyone, unless they ain't as dead as reported. Elkins studied her with increasing intensity. Mind if I ask where you served in Wyoming, Deputy Hart? Cheyenne, primarily. Before that, Fort Laramie. Elizabeth met his scrutiny with practiced ease. Feel free to wire Marshal Coleman for confirmation, though I believe he's currently on circuit in the northern counties. The challenge hung in the air between them. Elkins's hand remained uncomfortably close to his weapon, while his companions shifted restlessly in the doorway. Maybe I'll do that, he finally said. In the meantime, perhaps you wouldn't mind answering a few questions about the Blackwood incident. Professional courtesy, you understand? Of course, Elizabeth replied, though I was about to have lunch. At the hotel. Perhaps you'd care to join me. We can discuss it civilized-like over a hot meal. The suggestion caught Elkins off guard. His suspicious nature warred visibly with hunger from the trail and curiosity about her invitation. Mighty hospitable of you, Deputy, he conceded, with a nod that didn't reach his watchful eyes. Lead the way. As they stepped into the sunlight, Elizabeth caught sight of a rider approaching at a gallop from the direction of the telegraph office. Her contact had responded faster than anticipated. Now, everything depended on what message that rider carried, and whether she could keep Elkins distracted long enough to receive it. "Tell me, Mr. Elkins," she began as they walked, adopting the confident stride of someone with nothing to hide, "what exactly makes you so certain Elizabeth Harlow survived Tucson?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elkins matched her pace, studying her profile. Witness accounts. Man named Reagan swore she survived the attack before he died of knife wounds in Nogales last year. Claimed she was hunting Blackwood next. Deathbed confessions are notoriously unreliable, Elizabeth observed coolly. Men see all sorts of things when they're facing their maker. Maybe so, Elkins conceded, but when that story's followed by a series of deaths, all men connected to the Barrett gang, all killed with matching Colt revolvers, a pattern emerges. Elizabeth maintained her composure through decades of practice. Sounds circumstantial at best. Perhaps. Elkins gestured for his men to secure a corner table at the hotel restaurant as they entered. But circumstances pay the same as certainties in my line of work. The territorial governor's offering $5,000 for Harlow, dead or alive. Even without official confirmation, she survived. Waste of good money, Elizabeth remarked as they seated themselves, but I don't blame you for pursuing it. There. Conversation paused as a harried waitress delivered coffee and took their lunch orders. Elizabeth used the moment to survey the room, noting exits, counting weapons, identifying threats, old habits that had kept her alive through countless similar encounters. Elkins broke the silence once they were alone again. You know what's puzzling me most, Deputy Hart? How a woman transfers from Wyoming to New Mexico territory without paperwork. Reaching the marshal's office in Santa Fe, I visited there just last week. Your name wasn't on any roster. Elizabeth sipped her coffee, revealing nothing. Bureaucracy moves slowly, especially across territorial lines. My orders came directly from Judge Morrison in Denver. The name drop was calculated. Morrison was notorious for operating independently of territorial jurisdictions when the situation demanded. Few questioned his authority. Fewer still risked his displeasure by circumventing his directives. Uncertainty flickered across Elkin's face. Morrison, eh? That changes the complexion somewhat. Indeed. Elizabeth set down her cup precisely. The judge takes special interest in outlaw gangs operating across multiple territories. The Blackwood situation fell under his purview. Through the window, she spotted the telegraph rider speaking urgently with Sheriff Miller outside the jail. Whatever news had arrived, she needed just a few more minutes of distraction. Tell me about the shootout with Blackwood, Elkins pressed. Reports say it was quite impressive. Almost hard to believe one person could take down his entire gang, reports. Exaggerate, Elizabeth replied smoothly. Sheriff Miller and his deputies deserve most of the credit. I merely provided tactical support from my experience with similar situations in Wyoming. Yet Blackwood ended up with a bullet in his gut that matched your sidearm. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed fractionally. You seem remarkably well informed for someone who just rode into town, Mr. Elkins. Information's my stock in trade, Deputy. His smile didn't touch his eyes. Just as observation seems to be yours. You've catalogued every weapon and exit since we sat down. Professional habit, she acknowledged. No point denying what was obvious to another predator, indeed. Elkins leaned forward. Just as I've made it a habit to study faces. Yours is new to these parts, but something about the eyes. He left, the sentence hanging. Before Elizabeth could respond, the hotel doors swung open to admit Sheriff Miller, accompanied by a distinguished older gentleman in a black frock coat and string tie. The newcomer's silver hair and imperial bearing commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room. Deputy Hart, Miller called. Judge Morrison requests your presence. Elizabeth suppressed a smile at Elkins's startled expression. Her telegram gambit had succeeded beyond expectation. Rising from the table, she addressed the bounty hunter with newfound authority. Duty calls, Mr. Elkins. Feel free to enjoy your meal on the Deputy Marshal's office account. She adjusted her jacket with deliberate care. Should you wish to continue this conversation officially, I'll be available at the courthouse this afternoon. Elkins stood abruptly. Judge Morrison himself came to Redemption Creek for a standard outlaw cleanup. Nothing standard about the Blackwood situation, Elizabeth replied, if you'll excuse me. As she walked away, Elkins called after her, This isn't finished, Deputy Hart. Elizabeth turned, meeting his eyes directly. On that point, Mr. Elkins, we are in complete agreement. Outside, away from curious ears, Elizabeth greeted the distinguished visitor with genuine warmth. Harold, you're a long way from Denver. Judge Harold Forsyth, not Morrison, who existed only in strategic conversation, clasped her hand firmly. When I received your telegram, I couldn't very well send a deputy. Some debts can only be repaid in person. Miller looked between them with undisguised curiosity. You two have history. The judge's wife was on a stagecoach, the Barrett brothers. Attacked near Flagstaff, Elizabeth explained. I happened to be trailing them at the time. She saved Margaret and 8 other passengers, Forsyth elaborated. It took down 3 outlaws without a single civilian casualty. Never even told me her real name, just disappeared after ensuring the survivors reached safety. His keen eyes assessed her current situation. Until today's rather cryptic telegram. I apologize for the subterfuge, Elizabeth said, but circumstances required. Creative solutions. Forsyth waved away her concern. Consider my presence your formal appointment as Deputy Marshal for this district. I'll have the proper credentials delivered within the week. A wry smile creased his lined face. Deputy Elizabeth, Hart has a satisfying ring to it, For the first time in years, Elizabeth felt the weight of constant vigilance begin to lift. One telegram, one debt repaid, one moment of trust in others had secured what endless running never could: legitimacy. A new identity not forged in blood and shadow, but in the light of day, with the law's blessing. "What about Elkins and his men?" Miller questioned. "They're still convinced you're Harlow." "Let them think what they will," Forsyth declared. "Without proof, their suspicions are merely hearsay against the word of a federal judge." He patted the sheriff's shoulder. "Now, I believe congratulations are in order for your successful defense of the town. Perhaps the saloon would be an appropriate venue to discuss the details." As they walked toward Edmund's establishment, Elizabeth glanced back at the hotel. Elkins stood in the window, watching their departure with naked suspicion. The danger hadn't passed, merely transformed into something she could manage rather than flee. For now, that was enough. Tomorrow's troubles would wait for tomorrow. Judge Forsyth's presence changed everything. By nightfall, Elkins and his men had departed, their suspicions undermined by official documentation and the judge's imperious dismissal of their fairy tales about dead outlaws returning to life. The silver shipment arrived safely under Elizabeth's watchful eye, and for the first time since Tucson, she slept without a weapon in her hand. 1 week stretched into 2, then a month. Elizabeth settled into her role as deputy, patrolling the growing town with a quiet authority that commanded respect without requiring fear. The locals gradually accepted her presence, memory of the shootout fading into the background of daily life. But in quiet moments, standing alone on the boardwalk as sunset painted the distant mountains, Elizabeth found herself watching the horizon, with the wariness of a woman who knew that some stories never truly end, especially those written in blood. The first snow of winter dusted Redemption Creek 2 months after Elizabeth assumed her duties as deputy marshal. The white powder softened the town's rough edges, transforming muddy streets and weathered buildings into something almost picturesque. Standing on the jailhouse porch, nursing her morning coffee, Elizabeth watched children shriek with delight as they chased each other through fresh powder. "Your father and brothers were murderers who killed my husband for witnessing their crimes," Elizabeth countered, her voice carrying across the silent street. "The law couldn't touch them, so justice found another way." Barrett's eyes narrowed. "Justice? Is that what you call slaughtering men in their sleep?" "They were armed and waiting," Elizabeth replied, memories of that blood-soaked night flashing behind her eyes. "But we're not here to debate history. You've brought 6 men to kill 1 woman. Hardly seems sporting," says the woman who's turned an entire town into her personal army. Barrett gestured toward the windows where shadowy figures could be glimpsed. Edmonds, Bartender with his shotgun, the blacksmith and his apprentice armed with rifles, Miller's deputies positioned on rooftops. "I counted 14 guns on our ride-in. Seems you've made quite an impression on the locals." Elizabeth didn't deny it. "Redemption Creek protects its own." "How touching." Barrett turned to Elkins. "Search the buildings. Find anyone harboring weapons and bring them here. I want this so-called deputy to watch as we make examples." Before Elkins could comply, Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his Winchester now leveled at Barrett's chest. "That's not happening. You have no authority here." Barrett's smile turned predatory. "Authority flows from the barrel of a gun, Sheriff. Always has in places like this." He returned his attention to Elizabeth. "I'm offering you a choice, Harlow. Surrender yourself, and your precious town remains untouched. Refuse, and we burn it to the ground with everyone inside." "You're outnumbered," Elizabeth observed coolly. "Poor strategic thinking." "Am I?" Barrett gestured toward the eastern edge of town, where 4 more riders had appeared, each leading pack. Horses laden with suspicious cargo. "Those crates contain enough dynamite to level 3 blocks. My men have explicit instructions should anything happen to me." The stakes had just risen dramatically. Elizabeth calculated odds, positions, and civilian casualties with the cold precision that had kept her alive through countless confrontations. 14 defenders against 11 attackers, favorable numbers until explosives entered the equation. "What guarantee do I have that you'll leave Redemption Creek intact if I surrender?" she asked, buying time as she signaled Miller with a subtle gesture of her left hand. Barrett placed his hand over his heart in mock sincerity. "Why? You have my word as a gentleman. The same word my father gave your husband before your James met his unfortunate end." The deliberate provocation nearly worked. Elizabeth's hand twitched toward her holster before iron discipline reasserted control. "You're no gentleman, Nathaniel, just a spoiled child playing with guns." Barrett's false civility vanished. "Enough talk. Your decision, Harlow, you or the town." Just as Elizabeth opened her mouth to respond, Catherine stepped forward from the jailhouse porch, her regal bearing incongruous against the frontier backdrop. "Mr. Barrett," she called, her cultured voice cutting through the tension. "Perhaps you'd care to explain these before making threats." She held up several documents from the packet she'd brought, papers bearing the Barrett family seal and signatures. Barrett stiffened in his saddle. "Who the hell are you?" "Catherine Harlow, formerly Catherine Winters." She descended the steps with measured confidence. "Daughter-in-law to Richard Winters of the Philadelphia Winters. Perhaps you recognize the name. Your father conducted significant business with my father-in-law's bank." The recognition that flickered across Barrett's face confirmed Catherine had struck a nerve. "What are those papers?" "Evidence," Catherine replied simply. "Transfer documents showing how your father laundered money from stagecoach robberies through legitimate businesses. Correspondence planning the murder of federal witnesses, including my brother-in-law. Proof that you personally ordered 3 killings before your 21st birthday." "Lies," Barrett hissed, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Copies have already been sent to federal marshals, territorial governors, and several prominent newspapers," Catherine continued relentlessly. "Should anything happen to Deputy Hart, this town, or myself, they'll be published immediately." Elizabeth watched with grudging admiration as Catherine wielded words with the same deadly precision she herself used with guns. Barrett's men shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uncertain glances. Even Elkins appeared hesitant now, reassessing the situation's changing dynamics. Barrett's face had flushed with rage. "You think papers can protect you? Out here the only law is the only law." Judge Forsyth's commanding voice interrupted. "As he emerged from the hotel, is the one authorized by the United States government." He strode forward with the confidence of 30 years on the federal bench. "I received most interesting telegrams this morning, Mr. Barrett. It seems the San Francisco authorities have renewed interest in your family's affairs." Elizabeth recognized the judge's intervention for what it was, another layer of protection being wrapped around her and the town. Between Catherine's evidence and Forsyth's authority, Barrett's position was crumbling rapidly. "This is a private matter," Barrett insisted, desperation edging into his tone. "Between me and the woman who murdered my family. There's nothing private about threatening a federal officer and an entire town with dynamite," Forsyth countered. "Marshal Harlow, or Hart, as she's legally known now, acted as a duly deputized agent of territorial justice when she pursued your family for their crimes. The legal fiction was transparent to anyone who knew the truth, but it carried the weight of federal authority behind it." Barrett's men were now visibly uncomfortable, some already easing their horses backward. Barrett noticed their wavering resolve and snarled, "Stand fast! We didn't come all this way to be scared off by an old man with a title." "No," Elizabeth agreed, stepping closer. "You came for me, so let's settle this properly. You and me, Barrett. Right here." She patted her holstered Colt meaningfully. The challenge hung in the air, a duel, the oldest form of frontier justice. Barrett's scarred face twisted in contempt. "You can't be serious." "Deadly." Elizabeth gestured to the empty street around them. "One shot each. If you win, you get your revenge, and Judge Forsyth ensures your safe departure. If I win—" She shrugged. "Well, it won't matter to you, will it?" Catherine's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of her distress at Elizabeth's proposal. Miller and Forsyth exchanged grim looks, but remained silent, recognizing the strategy for what it was, a calculated risk to avoid wider bloodshed. Barrett studied her with naked hatred. "You think you're faster than me?" "I know I am." Elizabeth's confidence wasn't bravado, but simple fact. "But you're welcome to test that theory." For a long moment, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. Barrett's ambition warred visibly with his self-preservation as he weighed his options. His men had lost their appetite for a full-scale battle. The dynamite threat was compromised by Catherine's evidence, and his own reputation now hung in the balance. "Fine," he decided finally. "A duel. But when you're bleeding out in the dirt, remember you chose this end." Elizabeth nodded to Miller, who stepped forward to establish the terms. "Traditional rules. 10 paces, turn and fire on my command. Judge Forsyth will witness." The street cleared as Barrett's men retreated to the boardwalk, maintaining wary distance from the townspeople who emerged from hiding positions to witness the confrontation. Catherine moved to protest, but Elizabeth silenced her with a look that conveyed what couldn't be said aloud. "Trust me." Barrett dismounted, handing his reins to Elkins with a confidence that didn't quite reach his eyes. He removed his coat deliberately, revealing an ornate pistol in a hand-tooled holster. "Custom Colt," he remarked, noting Elizabeth's glance. "Had it made special after Tucson. Been practicing every day since." "Practice only takes you so far," Elizabeth replied, removing her jacket and handing it to Catherine. She whispered, "If this goes wrong, run, don't look back." Catherine clutched her arm briefly. "It won't go wrong. James always said you were the fastest draw he'd ever seen." Elizabeth positioned herself in the center of the street, facing Barrett across 10 paces of dust and destiny. The entire world narrowed to this moment. The weight of her Colt, the tension in Barrett's shoulders, the quality of light that illuminated every detail with preternatural clarity. Sheriff Miller raised his hand. "Back to back. Walk 10 paces on my count, turn on my command, fire on my signal." Elizabeth turned, feeling Barrett do the same behind her. Their shoulders nearly touched, the closest she'd been to her enemy since that blood-soaked night in Tucson. "1," Miller called. Elizabeth stepped forward, each footfall deliberate and measured. "2," Barrett's spurs jingled as he matched her pace. "3." She cleared her mind of everything but the mechanics of the draw, the precise angle of her hand, the exact pressure needed on the trigger. 4, 5. The street was utterly silent, but for their steps and Miller's counting. Elizabeth knew every face was watching, every breath held. 6, 7, she felt the familiar calm descend, the state of perfect clarity that had saved her life in countless gunfights. Time seemed to slow. 8, 9, 10, turn. Elizabeth pivoted with fluid grace, her hand dropping to her holster in a motion too swift for the eye to follow. Barrett turned a fraction slower, his hand reaching for his custom Colt. In the heartbeat before Miller could give the fire command, Barrett's discipline broke. His gun cleared leather early, a cheat as old as dueling itself. Elizabeth had anticipated the dishonorable move. Her Colt was already leveled as Barrett's first shot went wide, the report cracking across the street like thunder. A single bullet caught him in the center of his chest, the impact lifting him off his feet before he collapsed into the dust. Silence held for 3 eternal seconds before chaos erupted. Barrett's men reached for weapons as townspeople did the Same. Judge Forsyth's voice cut through the confusion. Hold! The duel was fair. Barrett fired first. Elizabeth kept her Colt trained on Elkins, who had half-drawn his pistol. It's over, she told him quietly. Take what's left of your employer and go. Elkins assessed the situation with a bounty hunter's pragmatism. Barrett dead, the town fully. Armed and alert, his own men uncertain. Slowly he raised his hands. You heard her, boys, he called to Barrett's remaining men. We're leaving, job's done, and we don't get paid for dying. 2 of Barrett's hired guns moved cautiously to retrieve their employer's body, keeping their hands well away from their weapons. The remaining men mounted up, faces grim with the knowledge of how close they'd come to their own end. As they departed, Elkins paused beside Elizabeth. You know, I almost admire you, Harlow, he said, voice pitched for her ears alone. But this won't be the end. Barrett has cousins, business partners. Money has a long memory. So do I, Elizabeth replied evenly. Tell them what happened here today. Tell them Redemption Creek is off limits. The bounty hunter touched his hat in ironic salute before turning his horse to follow the retreating party. Only when they had disappeared into the distance did Elizabeth finally holster her weapon. The townspeople converged around her, Miller clapping her shoulder, Edmund pressing a much-needed whiskey into her hand, Catherine watching with eyes bright with unshed tears. It's really over, she asked Elizabeth quietly. Elizabeth considered the question as the adrenaline of combat slowly ebbed from her system. Nathaniel Barrett was dead. The living connections to James's murder and her own near death in Tucson were now severed. The vengeance that had driven her for years had reached its logical conclusion. Yes, she decided, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. It's over. Judge Forsyth joined them, his expression grave but satisfied. Well executed, Deputy Hart, though I suspect that name may need adjustment in your permanent records. Elizabeth Hart suits me fine, she replied. Elizabeth Harlow fulfilled her purpose. The judge nodded understanding. Then I believe congratulations are in order, Deputy Hart. You've successfully defended your town and closed a significant case. I'll ensure the Barrett matter is permanently resolved in the official record. As the crowd dispersed and life cautiously resumed in Redemption Creek, Elizabeth found herself standing alone with Catherine on the jailhouse porch. Snow had begun falling again, fresh flakes covering the blood staining the street where Barrett had fallen. What now? Catherine asked, adjusting her scarf against the cold. Elizabeth considered the question. For the first time in years, her future wasn't defined by pursuit or survival. The possibilities stretched before her like the open country beyond. The town limits, uncertain but full of potential. I think, she said slowly, I'd like to see if I'm any good at being a deputy when I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder. Catherine smiled. James would have liked that. He always said you had a gift for helping people, even if your methods were unconventional. And you? Elizabeth asked. Back to Philadelphia? I think not. Catherine gazed out at the snow-covered street. There's something compelling about this place. Raw, certainly, but honest in a way the East hasn't been for generations. Besides, she added with unexpected humor, I've already purchased the vacant building next to the hotel. Redemption Creek could use a proper bank, don't you think? Elizabeth laughed, the sound startling her with its unfamiliar freedom. You're staying. Family stands together, Catherine reminded her simply. We're the only family either of us has left. As they walked toward Edmund's saloon, where the town had gathered to celebrate their deliverance, Elizabeth realized something fundamental had shifted within her. The weight she'd carried for so long, grief, rage, vengeance, had been replaced by something lighter, yet more substantial. Redemption Creek had lived up to its name, not just for her, but for all who called it home. In the falling snow, with Catherine beside her and a community that had become her own. Elizabeth Hart, no longer the angel of death, no longer a woman defined by her ghosts, stepped forward into a future unburdened by the past. "Never seen you smile like that before," Sheriff Miller observed, joining her with his own steaming cup. "Suits you." Elizabeth composed her features, unaware her expression had betrayed her, just thinking how snow makes everything look clean, even when it isn't. "Philosophical this morning, aren't we?" Miller chuckled, leaning against the railing. His injured leg had healed enough to retire the cane, though he still favored it in cold weather. "Hard to believe it's been 2 months since the Blackwood business." Elizabeth sipped her coffee, attention shifting to the stage rolling into town. These days, her vigilance was professional rather than paranoid, a subtle but significant difference. "You expecting anyone on today's coach?" Miller shook his head. "Just mail and supplies for Henderson's store." "Why?" She nodded toward a passenger, descending from the stage. A woman in an expensive traveling coat, her bearing unmistakably Eastern. "We don't get many city ladies passing through." "Odd timing for tourism," Miller agreed, straightening with renewed interest. "Though she might be visiting family for Christmas in Redemption Creek." Elizabeth arched a skeptical eyebrow. Most of the town's residents had left family connections far behind, one of many reasons she'd come to feel at home among them. Their speculation ended as the woman in question approached the jailhouse, her determined stride leaving precise footprints in the virgin snow. Up close, Elizabeth noted details that set off professional alarms. The quality of her clothing spoke of wealth, but the practical cut and sturdy boots suggested someone accustomed to action rather than ornament. Her face, framed by dark hair threaded with early silver, carried the composed intensity of a woman with purpose. "Sheriff Miller?" she inquired, her accent placing her somewhere north of Philadelphia. "Yes, ma'am." Miller tipped his hat. "What can I do for you?" "My name is Catherine Harlow." She produced a folded newspaper clipping, the same article Edmund had shown Elizabeth months earlier. "I'm looking for my sister-in-law." Elizabeth's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. Miller's startled glance confirmed they'd both registered the surname simultaneously. "I believe there's been some confusion." Elizabeth found her voice first. "I'm Deputy Elizabeth Hart. This is Sheriff Thomas Miller. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside." Catherine's sharp eyes studied Elizabeth's face, lingering on details most would overlook. The faint white line along her jaw from a knife fight in El Paso, the specific way she carried her shoulders, the deliberate placement of her feet even in casual stance. "There's no confusion," Catherine stated flatly as they entered the office. "You're Elizabeth Harlow. You married my husband's brother James before he was murdered by the Barrett gang." Miller closed the door behind them, shooting Elizabeth a concerned look. "Ma'am, I think it's all right, Thomas." Elizabeth set down her cup, resignation replacing shock. "How did you find me, Catherine?" Relief softened the older woman's features. "You remember me, then? From James's funeral, you wore blue." Elizabeth gestured toward a chair. "Please sit. It's a long way from Philadelphia." Catherine unwound her scarf but remained standing. "I've spent the last 2 years searching for you. After Tucson, when they reported you'd been killed, I never quite believed it. James always said you were too stubborn to die." A ghost of a smile touched Elizabeth's lips. "He would know." She leaned against the desk. "But that doesn't explain how you tracked me to Redemption Creek. I hired investigators, followed rumors, bribed telegraph operators." Catherine's mouth quirked with grim humor. "Family money has its uses. When that article appeared, I knew it had to be you." Miller cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harlow, I don't mean to be rude, but Deputy Hart's presence here is complicated. There are people who would pay handsomely for information about her whereabouts." "I'm well aware." Catherine finally took the offered seat. That's precisely why I've come. Elizabeth, you're in danger, more than you realize. Elizabeth exchanged glances with Miller. I'm always in danger. Goes with the territory. Not like this. Catherine opened her handbag, extracting a second newspaper, this one from San Francisco, dated just 2 weeks prior. Nathaniel Barrett is alive. The name landed like a physical blow. Elizabeth took the paper with uncharacteristically unsteady hands, reading the small article with mounting dread. Barrett returns from abroad. Nathaniel Barrett, sole surviving son of cattle baron Wesley Barrett, has returned to San Francisco after an extended convalescence in Europe. Barrett, presumed dead following the notorious massacre of his family 2 years ago, declined to comment on rumors linking outlaw Elizabeth Harlow to the murders. "Impossible," Elizabeth whispered. "I killed him. I saw him fall." "Apparently. Not dead enough," Catherine replied grimly, "and he's not alone in his resurrection. He's partnered with a bounty hunter, Brock Elkins." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. No wonder the man had seemed so certain of his information, so convinced of her identity, despite her careful charade. He hadn't been working on mere rumor. He'd been sent by someone who knew exactly who she was. Miller cursed softly. That complicates things. Elizabeth's mind raced through implications and contingencies. If Nathaniel recognized me from descriptions, Elkins could return with reinforcements, or worse, Nathaniel himself might come. "He's already coming," Catherine confirmed. "I intercepted a telegram in Denver. Barrett has assembled a team. Elkins, 3 other bounty hunters, and 2 gunmen from his father's ranch. They left San Francisco a week ago." Elizabeth paced the small office, calculation replacing shock. "How much time do we have?" 3 days, perhaps 4 with the mountain passes. Miller sank heavily into his chair. "We should wire Judge Forsyth. His authority might—" "Won't matter," Elizabeth cut him off. "This isn't about law anymore. It's personal." She turned to Catherine. "You shouldn't have come. You've put yourself in danger. James was my husband's brother." Catherine's voice held steel beneath its cultured tones. "Family stands together. Besides, I've brought more than warnings." She reached into her coat and withdrew an envelope thick with papers. Proof that Nathaniel Barrett was involved in his family's criminal enterprises, bank records, witness testimonies, property transfers, enough to destroy the fiction that he was an innocent victim. Elizabeth accepted the envelope, the weight of its contents offering new strategic possibilities. This could change everything, or nothing. Men like Barrett rarely face justice in courts. Then perhaps justice must find them elsewhere. Catherine's words carried the unflinching resolve of a woman who had abandoned convention for vengeance. In that moment, Elizabeth recognized a kindred spirit behind the Eastern refinement. "You shouldn't speak of such things," she cautioned, though without conviction. "Why not? We both know why you hunted the Barretts. What they did to James was—" Catherine's voice caught. "No court would have delivered appropriate punishment." Miller cleared his throat. "Ladies, as an officer of the law, I'm going to step outside and check on something important. I didn't hear this conversation." He donned his hat and made a tactical retreat, leaving the women alone. Elizabeth studied her sister-in-law with new appreciation. "You've changed since Philadelphia." "Grief does that." Catherine smoothed her skirts with practiced composure. "As does discovering your husband's family fortune was built on partnerships with men like Wesley Barrett." "James never knew," Elizabeth said softly. "He believed his brother's railroad investments were legitimate." "I know. Richard kept many secrets." Catherine's expression hardened. "Which is why I've spent the last 2 years untangling his financial web. Most of what I've brought, you came from his private safe." Elizabeth sat across from her unexpected ally, mind shifting to immediate practicalities. You'll need somewhere safe to stay. Barrett's men will recognize you if they've done their research. Already arranged. I took a room at the boarding house. Under my maiden name. Catherine's smile was sharp as a blade. This isn't my first subterfuge. Clearly. Elizabeth leaned back, reassessing everything. I need to warn Edmund, and we should move the children and elderly to the mine tunnels. If shooting starts, you're not considering running? Catherine sounded surprised. Elizabeth's expression hardened. I'm done running. This is my town now. Then I'll help you defend it. Catherine's declaration brooked no argument. I may not handle a gun like you, but I have other skills and resources. For a moment, Elizabeth glimpsed what her life might have been had circumstances been different, family connection, shared purpose beyond survival. The vision both warmed and disquieted her. First rule of Redemption Creek, she said finally. We protect our own. Catherine nodded once, understanding, the meaning beneath the words, as it should be. The next days passed in careful preparation. Elizabeth briefed Miller and Edmund on Barrett's imminent arrival, then selected strategic positions throughout town for trusted defenders. Judge Forsyth had indeed provided proper credentials and authority, but Elizabeth harbored no illusions about their protection against Barrett's vendetta. Paper shields crumpled easily under determined gunfire. Catherine proved unexpectedly valuable, her Eastern education translating to remarkable organizational skills. While Elizabeth handled tactical preparations, Catherine managed logistics, arranging supplies, securing the schoolhouse as a fallback position, even convincing the reluctant doctor to prepare his surgery for potential casualties. By the third morning, Redemption Creek had transformed from a bustling frontier town to a community braced for siege. Most civilians remained indoors. Shops closed early, and an eerie quiet settled over streets typically filled with commerce and conversation. Elizabeth stood at her usual post on the jailhouse porch, watching the eastern road with the patience of a hunter. Catherine joined her as the sun climbed higher, offering a cup of coffee and silent companionship. You should be at the boarding house, Elizabeth admonished without heat. Probably, Catherine agreed mildly, making no move to leave. They spotted the dust cloud an hour later, 7 riders approaching at a measured pace. Elizabeth recognized Elkins at the lead, and beside him, a figure whose very posture sent cold recognition through her blood. Nathaniel Barrett had indeed survived their encounter in Tucson, though not without cost. Even at a distance, she could see he rode with unnatural stiffness, one arm held close to his body. That's him, she confirmed for Catherine's benefit. Second from the left. Catherine studied the approaching riders with clinical detachment. Younger than I expected. Evil doesn't always wear age well. Elizabeth adjusted her gun belt. When they arrive, stay behind me, no matter what happens. The riders halted at the town's edge, taking measure of the unusual quiet. Elkins conferred briefly with Barrett before the group continued forward at a walk, spreading out in classic gunfighter formation. Sheriff Miller emerged from the jailhouse to stand beside Elizabeth, his Winchester cradled in the crook of his arm. Doesn't look like they're here for peaceful discussion. No. Elizabeth's hand hovered near her Colt, but we'll give them the chance to prove us wrong. The riders stopped in the center of the main street, directly before the jailhouse. Nathaniel Barrett urged his horse forward, a lean man in his early 30s, with aristocratic features, marred by a network of pale scars across his left cheek. His expensive clothes couldn't disguise the predatory tension in his body. "Elizabeth Harlow," he called, voice carrying across the empty street. "I've come to settle our business." Elizabeth stepped forward, putting herself between Barrett and the jailhouse porch, where Catherine and Miller remained. "It's Deputy Marshal Hart now, Barrett. Our business was concluded in Tucson. A cold smile twisted his scarred face. Clearly not, or one of us would be dead. He surveyed the quiet town with contempt. I see you've found yourself a new home. Charming, almost as charming as that badge you're hiding behind. State your business or move on, Elizabeth replied, ignoring the taunt. This is a peaceful town. Barrett's laugh held no humor. Peace is a luxury purchased with blood. You taught me that when you murdered my father and brothers. His hand moved to rest casually on his holstered pistol. I'm here to balance the ledger, here to balance the ledger, here to balance. Spring came early to Redemption Creek that year. The harsh winter that had followed Barrett's demise gave way to unexpected warmth, coaxing wildflowers from the surrounding hills, a new purpose from the town's inhabitants. Elizabeth found herself busier than ever, her duties expanding beyond mere peacekeeping to include arbitrating disputes, organizing the town's first proper election, and, most surprising to herself, teaching the local children to read on Sunday afternoons. "Never thought I'd see the day," Edmund remarked one evening as he and Elizabeth sat on the saloon's newly constructed porch. The feared Elizabeth Harlow reading fairy tales to children. Elizabeth sipped her coffee, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Deputy Hart," she corrected mildly. "And they prefer adventure stories to fairy tales." "Of course they do," Edmund chuckled. "Must be why young Timothy Marshall keeps drawing pictures of you with those twin colts blazing away." A smile touched Elizabeth's lips. Mrs. Marshall wasn't pleased about that. Can you blame her? Her boy wants to grow up to be a gunslinger instead of taking over the family store. Edmund's weathered face grew serious, though if he's looking for excitement, he won't find much these days. Town's been peaceful since winter broke. "Peace is good for business," Elizabeth observed, though she understood Edmund's meaning. The months following Barrett's death had transformed Redemption Creek. New buildings rose along the main street, including Catherine's Bank, which had opened to considerable fanfare the previous month. The silver mine had expanded operations, bringing wealth and new settlers. Progress marched steadily onward, bringing civilization in its wake. For someone who had lived by the gun for so long, such rapid domestication occasionally felt stifling. There were mornings when Elizabeth woke reaching for weapons no longer kept beside her bed. Nights when restlessness drove her to patrol streets that rarely needed patrolling anymore. "Sheriff's looking for you." Edmund nodded toward Miller, who was making his way across the street. Something in his step suggests trouble. Elizabeth straightened, instantly alert. "Thomas, what's happened?" Miller mounted the porch steps with unusual haste. "Telegram from Fort Gibson." He handed her the yellow paper, his expression grim. "Stagecoach robbery yesterday. Driver killed, passengers robbed. Description of the Outlaws matches the Reeves brothers." The Reeves brothers. Elizabeth studied the telegram, recalling what she knew of the gang. 3 of them, if memory serves. They operated around Kansas until the army drove them south. 4 now, Miller corrected. They picked up a 4th man last winter, Henry Blackwood. Elizabeth's head snapped up. "Any relation to Curtis?" "Younger brother. Word is, he's looking to rebuild the family business." Miller lowered his voice, though no one was near enough to hear. "Judge Forsyth thinks they might be heading this way." Revenge. Elizabeth considered the possibility. Curtis Blackwood's death wasn't public knowledge outside Redemption Creek. Officially, he died resisting arrest during an attempted robbery. But details had ways of spreading, especially among outlaws who shared information, hideouts, and grievances. "Possibly," Miller agreed, "or they might just be following the money. Either way, I'd prefer not to find out the hard way." Elizabeth folded the telegram thoughtfully. "When did the judge contact you?" "He didn't. Marshal Reynolds from the fort. Gibson office sent this directly." Miller glanced around before adding, "Judge Forsyth is in Denver handling that railroad dispute. Won't be back for weeks. The implications were clear. Without the judge's authority to call in additional lawmen, Redemption Creek would face any threat with only its resident peacekeepers, Miller, Elizabeth, and 2 part-time deputies with more enthusiasm than experience. Should we send for help? Miller asked. The question itself an admission of how circumstances had changed. There had been a time when the mere suggestion would have been unthinkable, when pride and self-sufficiency defined the town's character. Elizabeth considered their options. Send a wire to Silver City. Marshal Jackson owes me a favor. He might spare a man or 2. She rose from her chair, already calculating logistics. In the meantime, I'll ride out at first light, see if I can pick up their trail. Alone? Miller's concern was evident. That's not how we do things anymore, Elizabeth. It's reconnaissance, not confrontation, she assured him, though both knew the distinction often blurred in practice. If I locate them, I'll return for backup. Miller didn't look convinced, but nodded reluctantly. I'll organize additional security for the town while you're gone, and I'll speak with Catherine about temporarily relocating the bank's holdings. The mention of Catherine sent an unexpected pang through Elizabeth. Her sister-in-law had become an integral part of both the town and Elizabeth's life over the past months, her practical wisdom and unflagging support creating a foundation neither woman had anticipated. Catherine would oppose this mission, not from doubt in Elizabeth's abilities, but from fear of losing the only family she had left. Don't tell Catherine until morning, Elizabeth decided. No sense worrying her tonight. Miller's eyebrow rose. She's not going to thank either of us for that decision. Probably not, Elizabeth conceded with a hint of a smile, but she'll be less likely to try stopping me if I'm already gone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn found Elizabeth 8 miles east of Redemption Creek, following the stage road toward Fort Gibson. She'd slipped out of town before sunrise, leaving only a brief note for Catherine, explaining her absence would be short and necessary. Her saddlebags carried provisions for 3 days. Her rifles were cleaned and loaded, and the twin Colts rode comfortably at her hips, a homecoming of sorts to the woman she had once been. The landscape opened before her as the sun climbed higher, rolling. Hills giving way to scattered woodlands, streams still swollen with spring runoff, cutting silver paths through verdant valleys. In another life, she might have appreciated the beauty. Instead, her attention remained fixed on the practical, signs of recent passage, potential ambush points, the behavior of wildlife that might indicate human presence. By midday, she'd found what she was looking for. The unmistakable traces of 4 riders moving west along a game trail parallel to the main road. Their horses were shod, their pace unhurried, their confidence apparent in the casual way they'd made camp the previous night without concern for concealing their fire. Elizabeth dismounted to examine the tracks more closely. One horse was carrying extra weight, likely their stolen goods from the stage robbery. Another moved with an uneven gait, favoring its right foreleg. She filed away these details, building a mental image of her quarry. A twig snapped in the woods to her left. Elizabeth's reaction was instantaneous, dropping into a crouch behind her horse, colt drawn and leveled toward the sound. "Step out where?" "I can see you," she called. "Hands first." Silence stretched for 5 heartbeats. Then, improbably, Catherine Harlow emerged from the trees, hands raised as instructed, her expression caught between defiance and chagrin. "I told Thomas you'd go farther than Carson's Ridge," she remarked with forced casualness. Elizabeth holstered her gun, shock giving way to irritation. "What the hell are you doing out here? And how did you find me?" Sheriff Miller isn't the only one who received a telegram about the Reeves gang. Catherine approached, leading a bay mare Elizabeth recognized from the town livery. "As for finding you, I simply followed the most direct route toward Fort Gibson. You've always been efficient." Elizabeth took in her sister-in-law's appearance. With disbelief, Catherine had exchanged her usual practical skirts for split-riding trousers, scandalous by Eastern standards, but increasingly common among frontier women. A short rifle was secured to her saddle, and a small revolver hung in a holster at her waist. "You shouldn't be here," Elizabeth stated flatly. "It's dangerous. So is allowing you to face 4 armed men alone." Catherine's chin lifted in the stubborn gesture Elizabeth had come to recognize all too well. "I may not be a legendary gunfighter, but I'm not helpless either. This isn't about your abilities." Elizabeth ran a hand through her hair in frustration. "These men are killers." "So was Nathaniel Barrett," Catherine countered. "I handled him well enough." With words and documents, not bullets, Elizabeth gestured toward the fresh tracks. Reeves brothers won't be impressed by bank ledgers or legal threats." Catherine's expression softened. "I'm not trying to interfere with your methods, Elizabeth. I'm ensuring you have support." She untied a leather case from her saddle. "Besides, I brought something that might interest you." Curiosity temporarily overriding irritation, Elizabeth watched as Catherine unfolded a detailed map of the territory. The 4th man, Henry Blackwood, purchased land 3 months ago through a Denver bank. Catherine indicated a location some 20 miles northwest. An abandoned silver claim in the foothills, remote, defensible, with multiple escape routes toward the border. Elizabeth studied the map with new respect for Catherine's investigative skills. "How did you learn this? Banking connections," Catherine replied with modest pride. "Institutions communicate with one another. When Sheriff Miller mentioned Blackwood's name last night, I sent inquiries along certain channels." "You've been planning this since last night." Elizabeth's annoyance returned. "Were you ever going to tell me?" "I'm telling you now," Catherine pointed out reasonably. "Would you have waited for me if I'd suggested joining forces this morning?" The answer was obvious to them both. Elizabeth sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing with a woman who had clearly inherited the Harlow stubborn streak by marriage. "Fine. You can accompany me as far as the next town. Then you'll take the stage back to Redemption Creek while I continue alone." Catherine's smile suggested she had no intention of complying with this plan, but she nodded agreeably. "Of course. Shall we proceed?" Daylight's wasting. They traveled northwest, abandoning the main road for less traveled paths that would intersect with the gang's likely route toward Blackwood's property. Catherine proved a surprisingly capable riding companion, maintaining pace without complaint despite the challenging terrain. By late afternoon, they'd covered significant ground, the landscape gradually transitioning from open plains to the rocky foothills of the mountain range. "We should make camp soon," Elizabeth observed as shadows lengthened. "There's a small canyon, ahead with a spring, defensible position for the night." Catherine nodded, fatigue evident in her posture, though she'd voiced no complaint. "Lead on." The canyon offered natural shelter, high walls protecting them from the wind, a small stream providing fresh water, and limited approaches that could be easily monitored. Elizabeth set about making camp with practiced efficiency, while Catherine tended the horses. "You've done this before," Elizabeth noted, watching Catherine check their mounts for trail injuries with competent hands. "Richard insisted I learn basic horsemanship before we married," Catherine replied. "He believed a banker's wife should understand all aspects of his business, including inspecting properties that required travel." "James never mentioned that." Catherine's expression softened at the memory. "James thought it terribly progressive. He used to joke that I'd be running the bank myself someday." She patted her mare's neck gently. "I suppose he was right, in a roundabout way." Elizabeth busied herself preparing a small, smokeless fire. "He would have been proud of you." "Of both of us, I think." Catherine joined her by the fire as darkness settled around them, though perhaps surprised by our current circumstances. The understatement drew a rare laugh from Elizabeth. James always said life had a way of taking unexpected turns. They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, sharing Catherine's canteen of surprisingly good coffee. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Elizabeth found herself relaxing into a companionship she'd never anticipated when she first arrived in Redemption Creek. "I've been meaning to ask," Catherine said as they settled by the fire. "Why did you choose Redemption Creek? Of all the places you could have hidden, why there?" Elizabeth considered the question. "It wasn't a conscious choice. I was tracking Curtis Blackwood. He had connections to the silver mine operations. I arrived planning to stay a week at most. Yet you remained for months, even after identifying him." "I needed to be certain," Elizabeth explained. "Rushing had nearly cost me my life in Tucson, and then—" She paused, searching for words to describe the gradual shift in her priorities. "Then the town became more than just a backdrop for my hunt." "It became home," Catherine supplied. "Something like that." Elizabeth stared into the flames. "Edmund offered me work. The locals minded their business, for the first time in years. I could breathe without constantly looking over my shoulder." Catherine studied her thoughtfully. "And now, with Barrett gone, and your identity secured by Judge Forsyth's intervention, now it's truly home," Elizabeth admitted. "Though days like today remind me there's a part of me that still belongs to the trail." "The hunt," Catherine observed without judgment. "The purpose," Elizabeth corrected, "knowing exactly what needs to be done and having the skills to do it." Catherine nodded, understanding. "That's why I insisted on coming. Some burdens shouldn't be carried alone, even by those perfectly capable of bearing them." Elizabeth might have argued the point once. Instead, she found herself grateful for the company, for the shared responsibility, for the knowledge that someone cared enough to follow her into danger. "We should get some rest," she said finally. "Tomorrow will be challenging." Morning brought clear skies and fresh tracks. The Reeves gang had passed within 2 miles of their position during the night, heading directly toward Blackwood's property. Elizabeth studied the trail with growing concern. "They're pushing hard now," she observed. "Fresh horses, too. They must have switched mounts at some point yesterday." Catherine joined her examination. "What does that tell you?" "They're not just passing through. They have a specific destination and timeline." Elizabeth mounted, adjusting her gun belt. "We need to move quickly." They rode in tense silence, following the increasingly fresh signs of the Outlaws' passage. By midday, Elizabeth estimated they were less than an hour behind their quarry, close enough for caution. "From here, we proceed on foot," she decided, securing their horses in a sheltered grove. "Blackwood's property should be just beyond that ridge." Catherine checked her small revolver with determined precision. "What's the plan?" "Reconnaissance only," Elizabeth emphasized. "We observe their numbers, defenses, and intentions. Then we return to town for reinforcements." Something in her tone must have betrayed her, for Catherine gave her a skeptical look. "You don't believe they'll still be there when you return with help?" "Outlaws rarely linger," Elizabeth acknowledged, "especially after a job like that stagecoach. Robbery!" They crept forward through the underbrush, using natural cover to approach the ridge overlooking Blackwood's claim. Elizabeth motioned for Catherine to stay low as they reached the vantage point. Below them, nestled against the hillside, stood a crude but defensible structure. Part mining office, part cabin, with a separate stable and what appeared to be the collapsed entrance to a mine shaft. 4 horses were corralled nearby, confirming their quarry had arrived. "There," Catherine whispered, pointing toward movement near the cabin door. A man emerged, tall and lean, with the distinctive red beard of the eldest Reeves brother. He carried a rifle casually in the crook of his arm as he surveyed the surrounding area with the wariness of a man accustomed to pursuit. "That's Isaiah Reeves," Elizabeth confirmed softly, "the leader. A second man joined him, shorter but heavily muscled, with a pockmarked face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. They conversed briefly before the newcomer handed over what appeared to be a leather satchel. "Dividing the spoils," Elizabeth murmured. "Earlier than expected. They must be planning to separate soon, The observation was confirmed moments later when two more men exited the cabin, one clearly another Reeves' brother, based on his similar features, the other a younger man, whose bearing immediately registered with Elizabeth. "Henry Blackwood," she breathed, recognizing Curtis's distinctive family traits even at a distance. "He moves like his brother." Catherine tensed beside her. "What are they doing?" The four men had formed a circle, examining the contents of several bags and parcels spread on a rough wooden table. Isaiah appeared to be directing the distribution, occasionally gesturing toward the mountains to the west. "Planning their next move," Elizabeth assessed. "Likely splitting up to make pursuit more difficult." She pointed to a canvas bag one of the men was securing to his saddle. "That's probably the money from the stage robbery." As they watched, the discussion below grew more animated, Henry Blackwood gesturing emphatically while Isaiah Reeves shook his head. The tension was palpable even from a distance. "Disagreement about the plan," Elizabeth whispered. "That could work to our advantage." Catherine shifted positions slightly to maintain her view. "What do we—" The snap of a broken branch behind them cut her question short. Elizabeth whirled, reaching for her Colt, but found herself staring into the barrel of a rifle held by the third Reeves' brother, who had somehow circled behind their position. "Well now," he drawled, yellow teeth visible beneath a matted beard, "what have we here? Two lady spies. Isaiah's going to be mighty interested in this." Elizabeth assessed their options with lightning speed. The man's rifle was already aimed, his finger on the trigger. Any sudden move would likely result in at least one of them being shot. "We're not spies," she replied calmly. "Just travelers who got lost." "Pretty well armed for lost travelers," he observed, noting her Colts. "Hands away from them, guns, nice and slow." Elizabeth complied, signaling Catherine to do the same. "No need for violence. We'll be on our way." "Oh, I don't think so," he chuckled, gesturing with his rifle. "Stand up, both of you. Isaiah's going to want to meet the ladies who've been tracking us." Elizabeth rose slowly, her mind calculating distances and angles, looking for any advantage. Catherine followed her lead, maintaining remarkable composure. "Despite the danger, move," their captor ordered, indicating they should descend toward the cabin. "And don't get no ideas about running. I'm a fair shot even with moving targets." They had no choice but to comply. As they approached the clearing, the other outlaws noticed their arrival, hands immediately moving to weapons. "Look what I found up on the ridge," their captor called proudly. "Couple of she-wolves watching our business." Isaiah Reeves stepped forward, rifle raised. "Search them, Luke." The younger Reeves' brother quickly relieved Elizabeth of her Colts and Catherine of her small revolver. His hands lingered unnecessarily during the process, drawing a cold stare from Elizabeth that momentarily gave him pause. "Well, well," Isaiah remarked, studying his captives. "What brings two fine ladies to our humble abode?" "Just passing through," Elizabeth replied evenly. "We saw your camp and were curious." Isaiah's eyes narrowed as he took in her appearance. More carefully, "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "I doubt it." Elizabeth kept her voice neutral, though she could sense recognition brewing. Her reputation had spread across 3 territories during her hunting days. It was only a matter of time before someone made the connection. Henry Blackwood had remained silent until now, lurking at the edge of the group. He stepped forward suddenly, his young face tightening with sudden revelation. "I know her," he declared, pointing at Elizabeth. "She's the one who killed my brother Curtis, the woman they called the Angel of Death." A heavy silence fell over the clearing. Isaiah's expression shifted from suspicious to calculating, his eyes reassessing Elizabeth with New respect and malice. Elizabeth Harlow, he said slowly. Thought you were dead. People keep saying that, Elizabeth replied, seeing no point in denial now. Yet here I stand. Isaiah grinned unpleasantly. Not for long. He turned to Catherine. And who might you be? Another famous gunslinger? Catherine Harlow, she answered with dignity. Bank manager. This drew harsh laughter from the Outlaws. Bank manager, Luke repeated mockingly. Ain't that convenient? Maybe she can help us count our money. Isaiah silenced him with a gesture. Take them inside. Tie them up while we decide what to do with them. The interior of the cabin was sparse and filthy. A single room with rough furniture and the lingering smell of unwashed bodies. Luke secured them to chairs with practiced efficiency, binding their wrists and ankles with rope that bit into flesh. Henry's been looking for you, he informed Elizabeth with malicious pleasure. Ever since word reached us about Curtis, said he wanted to look you in the eye before he killed you. He's welcome to try, Elizabeth replied coolly. His brother made the same mistake. Luke's hand cracked across her face, snapping her head sideways. Mouthy bitch! We'll see how brave you are when Isaiah gets started on your friend here. Catherine's face paled, but she remained silent, her eyes fixed on Elizabeth in silent communication. They had discussed contingencies for situations like this during the long months of Catherine's frontier education. If opportunity presented itself, they would be ready. Left alone briefly while the gang conferred outside, Elizabeth tested her bonds. Can you reach the knife in my boot? She whispered to Catherine, whose chair had been placed back to back with hers. I'll try, Catherine murmured, her fingers straining against her bindings. They didn't search us very thoroughly. Overconfident, Elizabeth agreed. It's a common failing among their type. Catherine's breathing quickened with effort as her fingers stretched toward Elizabeth's boot. Almost there. The cabin door swung open, ending their attempt. Isaiah Reeves entered, followed by Henry Blackwood. The younger man's expression burned with vindictive anticipation. Well now, Isaiah began, pulling up a chair to face Elizabeth. We find ourselves in an interesting situation. Henry here wants to kill you slow for what you did to his brother. I'm inclined to let him, considering the bounty on your head expired. With your reported death, there's another option, Elizabeth replied calmly. Let us go now and you might live to see tomorrow. Isaiah laughed. Bold words from a woman tied to a chair. He pulled out a knife, testing its edge against his thumb. But before Henry gets his revenge, I'm curious about a few things, like how you found us, and who else knows you're here. The entire U.S. Marshal's office, Catherine interjected, drawing their attention. A full contingent is less than an hour behind us. Nice try, Isaiah sneered. If that were true, you'd have waited for them instead of coming alone. We weren't. Alone, Elizabeth picked up the bluff seamlessly. Our companions are positioned in the hills with rifles. When we don't return by sundown, they have orders to open fire. Doubt flickered across Isaiah's face, but Henry wasn't buying it. She's lying, he insisted. Curtis told me how she works. Always alone. Things change, Elizabeth replied. People change. Enough talk. Henry stepped forward, drawing his pistol. I've waited too long for this moment. Isaiah held up a restraining hand. Not yet. Dead women don't answer questions. He turned back to Elizabeth. Where's the rest of your posse? Before she could respond, a shot rang out from outside, followed by a cry of pain. Everyone froze, Isaiah and Henry exchanging alarmed glances. Luke! Isaiah called toward the door. No answer came. A second shot shattered the cabin's single window, sending glass spraying across the room. Henry cursed, ducking behind a table as Isaiah moved quickly to the door, rifle raised. The hell is going on out there? He shouted. That would be my posse, Elizabeth remarked dryly. The distraction was all Catherine needed. Her fingers finally reached the knife in Elizabeth's boot, extracting it with desperate haste. As Isaiah turned back toward them, she pressed the blade into Elizabeth's hands. What happened next unfolded with the speed and precision that had made Elizabeth Harlow a legend. The knife sliced through her bonds in a single motion. Her chair toppled backward as she dropped to the floor, avoiding Isaiah's startled shot by inches. Rolling to her feet, she launched herself at Henry just as he emerged from behind the table, her shoulder driving into his midsection with bone-crushing force. His gun discharged harmlessly into the ceiling as they crashed into the wall. Elizabeth's hand closed around his wrist, twisting with practiced skill until the bones snapped. He screamed, the weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Isaiah swung his rifle toward them, but hesitated, unwilling to risk hitting his partner. That moment of hesitation proved fatal as another shot came through the window, catching him in the shoulder and spinning him around. Elizabeth scooped up Henry's fallen pistol and fired twice. Isaiah Reeves collapsed, his rifle clattering too. "The floorboards! Catherine!" she called urgently, keeping the gun trained on Henry's writhing form. "I'm all right," came the shaky reply, "though I could use some help with these ropes." Outside, the shooting had stopped. An eerie silence fell over the clearing, broken only by Henry's pained whimpering and Catherine's harsh breathing as Elizabeth cut her free. "Stay here," Elizabeth instructed, retrieving her Colts from where they'd been placed on a side table. "Don't move until I call for you." Approaching the door cautiously, Elizabeth eased it open, weapon ready. The sight that greeted her was both shocking and oddly fitting. Sheriff Thomas Miller stood in the clearing, rifle in hand, with Edmund Bartlett beside him, holding a smoking shotgun. The bodies of Luke Reeves and the fourth gang member lay motionless. "In the dirt." "Took you long enough," Elizabeth called, lowering her weapon slightly. Miller grinned through his concern. "You're welcome. Catherine's message reached us just in time." "Message?" Elizabeth turned to find Catherine standing behind her, a mix of defiance and satisfaction on her face. "I may have sent a telegraph from the last way station we passed," she admitted, "requesting backup to arrive today." Elizabeth stared at her in disbelief. "You planned this?" "I planned for contingencies," Catherine corrected primly, "just as you taught me." Edmund approached, ejecting spent shells from his shotgun. "When a bank manager and a deputy both disappear after hearing about Outlaws, folks get concerned." His eyes twinkled with grim humor, especially when said bank manager leaves very specific instructions about where to find them if they don't return on schedule. "Henry Blackwood's still alive inside," Elizabeth informed them, shaking off her surprise. "He'll need a doctor, but he'll survive to hang." Miller nodded to one of the deputies who'd accompanied them. "Secure the prisoner. We'll transport him back to town once we've buried his friends." As the cleanup began, Elizabeth found herself standing alone with Catherine at the edge of the clearing. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ground, painting the scene in hues of amber and gold. "You never intended to return to town when I suggested it," Elizabeth observed, no accusation in her tone. "Just as you never intended to wait for reinforcements before confronting the gang," Catherine countered with a knowing smile. Elizabeth couldn't help but laugh, a genuine sound of both relief and newfound respect. "We make a formidable team. It seems—" "Family usually does," Catherine replied simply. "James would be proud of us both." As they watched Miller and his men secure the Outlaws' stolen goods and prepare for the journey back to Redemption Creek, Elizabeth felt something settle within her, a sense of completion that had eluded her even after Barrett's death. "What happens now?" Catherine asked, echoing the question she'd posed months earlier after the duel. Elizabeth considered the future stretching before them. A town finding its identity, a community that had accepted them both, purpose that extended beyond mere survival or vengeance. "Now," she said with quiet certainty, "we go home. The return to Redemption Creek brought unexpected fanfare. Word of the Reeves gang's defeat had somehow preceded them, transforming their arrival into something of a celebration. Townspeople lined the main street, cheering as Miller's posse rode in with their prisoner and recovered loot. Judge Forsyth arrived the following week to conduct Henry Blackwood's trial, a swift affair that ended with a sentence to be carried out at the territorial prison rather than locally. Elizabeth testified briefly, presenting only the facts of the recent confrontation, leaving the ghosts of the past undisturbed. Summer arrived with promise of prosperity. Catherine's bank flourished, bringing new investment to the growing town. The silver mine expanded operations, and a schoolhouse was raised on land donated by Edmund Bartlett, who claimed he was too old to need so much property anyway. Elizabeth continued her duties as deputy, finding satisfaction in peacekeeping rather than manhunting. Her reputation gradually transformed from that of a legendary gunslinger to a respected law woman, someone who protected rather than pursued. If she occasionally grew restless during particularly quiet weeks, long rides along the territorial borders usually settled her spirit. On the anniversary of James's death, Elizabeth and Catherine rode together to a hilltop overlooking the town. They shared a bottle of good whiskey and memories of the man who had connected them, husband to one, brother to the other. Sometimes, I think he orchestrated all of this somehow, Catherine mused, watching the sunset paint Redemption Creek in shades of fire. Bringing us together, giving us both a second chance. Elizabeth considered this with unusual sentimentality. James always did like happy endings. Is that what this is? Catherine asked. An ending? Elizabeth shook her head. Watching the lights come on one by one in the town below, Edmund's saloon, the new general store, homes with families inside, a community that had given her something she'd never thought to find again after James's death. No, she decided. Not an ending at all, just the close of one chapter and the beginning of another. As darkness fell completely, they rode back toward the lights of town. Two women who had found redemption in the most unlikely of places, carrying the weight of the past, but no longer defined by it. For Elizabeth Harlow, once the angel of death, now simply deputy heart to those who needed her, the journey had come full circle. She'd arrived in Redemption Creek hunting vengeance and instead discovered something far more valuable, a life worth living rather than merely surviving. A family forged in adversity rather than blood, and a home that had finally lived up to its name. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.